Delighted to have Felicia Dinkel from EY in a one-on-one discussion with Bud Darr of MSC. So please go ahead.
Okay. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here and to speak with Bud about some very important topics that are going on, of course, in the shipping industry, and especially for the containerized shipping. So the three topics we're going to talk about, of course, are geopolitical, we're going to talk about shipping, and we're going to talk about the energy transition. So, Bud, my first question to you, as we all know, what's on the minds of many people is in the news all over, is geopolitical. So we know that the conflict in Suez has affected, of course, your shipping, and it's increased security. You have, of course, higher premiums for you. And with the drought in the Panama Canal, you have reduced number of vessels that are going through. And so we want to understand, how is MSC handling this situation, and what type of cost structures have you put into place in order to deal with these extra costs?
Yeah, well, thank you, Felicia, and good morning, everyone. Nicholas, thank you once again for what proves to be another great event. I don't know how you keep doing it over and over around the world, but another really great event. Now, I was told this would be a fireside chat. Apparently, it's going to be a fireplace-side chat, but that's okay. In all seriousness, we're facing really substantial challenges in shipping overall, but as MSC, both with our cargo and our cruise operations, we've been significantly disrupted by the Red Sea, as many others have in this room. It's important when you think about the container sector in particular, not to look at any single component or any single destination or even any single loop in isolation. You really have to look at it as an interconnected network. So when this situation emerged, the fact that there was already disruption in the Panama Canal and also some network disruptions due to customer needs in North America because of the uncertainty over the Gulf and East Coast labor negotiations, similar to what we saw a year and a half ago or so when we were having the same conversation about the West Coast. And it all kind of ties together. I can say for our networks, the Panama Canal to date has not been significantly disrupted because volumes are down a little bit anyway, and we're large enough and frequent enough customers where we plan out a long ways ahead and typically have reservations which help us keep our scheduling needs amidst a somewhat reducing volume background for the East Coast and Gulf Coast for deliveries from Asia as well. So that part has been manageable for us if it doesn't get much worse. But when you overlay that against what's happening in the Red Sea, it's a pretty dramatic effect of what's required here. And so what we did was, how can we provide the service that's needed, the essential service? And fortunately, there was a bit of a mismatch in capacity and the demand in the marketplace at the time, and it's no secret to anyone in this room. We've taken a strategy to grow our fleet at a time when the market was not at its very strongest, or maybe we began that when the market was very strong, but we've continued. So we had extra capacity to inject into the networks, and we're now to the point where, with regard to the Red Sea disruption, our customers now are pretty much seeing steady state, and we think that around the world we've injected the capacity that needs to be there. It costs a bit more because you have to have more ships in service, you have to consume more fuel, and to keep the same scheduling frequencies, you have to go faster in some trades as well. And in some cases that has collateral costs, such as like the EU ETS liabilities that come with that. So we have managed to pick the right ships, which has helped with cost reduction to get matched up within our networks, whether we're talking about adapting on trades that wouldn't normally go through the Red Sea or those that do and are now going around the Cape. We also have put in place cost recovery measures with our customers. The market will tell us whether in the longer term they're at the right level or not. Nobody knows for sure what the final cost looks like on that. But if we're in this for a while with the Red Sea, and unfortunately I'm one that believes we are, those surcharges will eventually be molded into the prevailing freight rates in the market over some period of time, and the market will self-adjust. Even if you do have surcharges, it is a very competitive business, even with this need for extra capacity. So then what we've done is try and optimize our fleet, operate it as efficiently as we possibly can, and then recover those costs that we can. Ultimately, we have to make some amount of profit or we can't continue the services. But we're pretty confident we're over the hump with regard to adapting our networks worldwide.
Okay. Further along that line, from a geopolitical standpoint, when you see the decoupling of China from the U.S. and some other changes that are going on around the world with ASEAN and Japan, et cetera, what does MSC see? What are your views on deglobalization that's out there? You know, and what do you think the impact will be on your business as things kind of change and shift?
I'll start with just a top-line message that I think the decoupling or deglobalization discussions we're hearing are overstating what we're actually seeing in reality in the markets. I mean, conceptually, it sounds like something that maybe makes some sense politically, but let's face it. I mean, these manufacturing hubs developed where they developed for a pretty good business reason, and some of those dynamics haven't changed. What we are seeing, and we've definitely seen it accelerate since the pandemic, was a diversification of supply chains, movement out of China of some manufacturing to other places in Southeast Asia. But in the container sector, honestly, if you're not nimble enough to adapt your networks to meet the trade needs of your customers, you're not going to be very successful in this business. So we're ready to do that, even if the decision is to nearshore or recoupling to a greater degree than we've seen. But we definitely have seen some redistribution in Southeast Asia that was a trend that was beginning before the pandemic that's carried over now, and we're going to be really well prepared to suit those needs going into the future.
Okay. You have a substantial order book, and you know it's going to dramatically increase the capacity. You have also you're going to be ending the 2M alliance. And what is your take on the supply and demand of the container industry now with that?
A couple of things. One is I probably phrase it a little differently and say the 2M alliance is ending. Okay. And that's the way it is. So we're prepared for that. We do have a substantial order book. We've also acquired a lot of secondhand tonnage within our fleet. And it's really been an enhanced focus on the ocean shipping component, which has really been our core business. I mean, I work for a family business, and like one of the previous speakers, Eric, said, if there's one shareholder that's happy, we're all pretty happy. And his vision is to continue to be principally and foremost an ocean carrier, and our moves reflect that. But don't be deceived. I mean, it's not like we're going to operate a secondhand ship forever, and we do need new, more efficient tonnage to come into the networks in order to meet a variety of regulatory needs that are out there, which are evolving, and we're trying to anticipate that best we can. So some of that new tonnage may very well just replace older tonnage, and if the mismatch in the market, which, by the way, I mean, the analysts are kind of waffling a little bit. I think it's kind of a dangerous business to project the market too far out in advance. But what I'm very comfortable with is if it turns out that there is a mismatch and too much supply, we probably would just accelerate the retirement of the older ships that are in our network and replace them with the newer, more efficient ships. Also, the carbon intensity indicator and some other regulations, but that one in particular has an immediate effect, has absorbed, say, 7 to 10% of the tonnage, or let me say capacity that's available in our networks as well, because if you've done the easy stuff or even the harder stuff like bows and propellers, slowing down is one of the measures you're going to use to comply with that and comply with the EEXI and EEDI as well. You're going to operate at slower service speeds. So that absorbs some tonnage. And then these disruptions we have right now where we're fortunate. We did have a little bit of overcapacity. If we were at the utilization rates we were at going into the pandemic, and this Red Sea disruption happened, we would be in a very, very difficult position. But we invested in the extra capacity, just as all those in the value chain should be investing in extra capacity in the supply chain, having learned from the pandemic. We're glad we have that capacity today, and we're able to deploy it, even if it comes at a bit of a cost.
Okay, but I'm going to move on to something that you often hear about in the industry, which is digitization. So what is MSC doing? I mean, companies are very much involved. How are you going to make sure that your shipping information is passed along to the importers and exporters? How is MSC involved?
Well, the word digitalization sometimes makes me bristle a little bit because it's very much like a pet rocket in the eyes of the beholder. But I like to think of it as using available technology to maximize the potential that you can get out of it to enhance the business you're operating and the service you're providing to your customers. We believe very strongly that there's enormous benefit to be had there, both on the cost side, and then that gets translated into the market as savings on the pricing side for the customers as well. An example is the electronic bill of lading. If you've gone around the world, as I have, to our agencies and seen the lines of people waiting to pick up pieces of paper that, frankly, they shouldn't have to pick up anymore, you'd be as happy as I am to see electronic bills of lading now start to gain widespread acceptance. Also, we were a founding member of the Digital Container Shipping Association, which really all the Western carriers are united in, and we still chair that. We believe there's a lot of potential in at least harmonizing the data protocols so that even different systems could be compatible with each other. So I think that's an area for a lot of benefit. And then also operationally, there's a lot of potential to unlock there with regard to energy efficiency in particular. We created a digital twin with the shipbuilder for our newest cruise ship to really challenge ourselves and see if we were optimizing the performance. It was a bit of a shock to me, but we actually outperformed the digital twin, and not by a little bit, by like 11% on the initial voyage, which says to me there's even more potential there as you can figure out how to take purely operational aspects and digitize them into an algorithm that can actually translate that into math, because I think the design elements are easier to do that than the operational elements.
Okay. I just want to switch to energy transition, and we know that you're a very large part of the industry in a coalition about looking at, accelerating the decarbonization of the global maritime fleet. And I know that there's been some talk about going up to the Arctic. Would you kind of speak to us a little bit about what your views regarding how that will affect, the energy transition that the industry is looking at?
Yeah, let me start with the Arctic. I mean, our view is, except for shipping that has to be there, we don't belong there. We just think that the risks posed by the lack of reliable chart data, the weather conditions, the lack of experience in operating in those conditions, and the distance from emergency resources that you might need when something goes wrong. Let's face it, we're all in the shipping business here. You have bad days. Something's going to go wrong. It's just a question of what is it, when, and how big is it. So we won't use the northern sea routes for transit, and we would hope others would take a good look at that too for both safety and environmental protection reasons. When it comes to decarbonization overall, we're involved in many collaborative efforts in addition to our own internally, among those the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization in Singapore, the Maersk McKinney Moeller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. I could go on. It's a pretty big list. But Knut, who's with us today, said something in Oslo that I'm going to steal and repeat. When somebody said, what is the fuel? Because people ask us that all the time. What's the answer? Well, he said the fuel of the future, the best one, is collaboration. I think he's right. No company, I don't even think this sector, based on my deep experience in trying to find the fuels, is going to be able to solve this on their own. So you've got to collaborate, and I think we actually benefit a lot when we look outside our own sector. And I want to go back to refer to some comments that were made in the previous panel that I think were spot on. I mean, somebody called out the elephant standing in the middle of this beautiful room, and that is, without the fuels, this doesn't happen. We could buy all the nicest ships in the world we want, and MAN and WinGD and Wärtsilä could provide us all the best engines in the world, but if we don't have the fuel to put in them, this is all just talk. We really need the fuels, so we need to figure out a way to get the fuels developed, get them to the market, and get them delivered the final mile. And let's not kid ourselves. Just because we think is a good idea in a particular molecule to use for energy, it's not just our idea. We're going to have to compete for that. And in some cases, ammonia being a good example, methanol being another example. There are other users that aren't just using it for energy production that also need their share of these green fuels. So that's where the focus, in my opinion, and the help from governments can be of the most value is let's get the fuels into the market, because that leg is winning the race right now. The technology side is keeping up just fine.
Bud, thanks. This has been delightful speaking with you. But since we have just a few minutes left, I want to ask you, is there any last comment you would like to give to the audience regarding MSC and regarding our discussion?
Yeah, well, thanks, Felicia. I've really enjoyed it. I wish we had 15 hours, but we'd put everyone to sleep, or I would. A couple of things. One is I'm so grateful for the opportunity the Aponte family has given me to work for them in this industry. What a fantastic time to be involved. It's one of the most challenging times we've ever faced. I mean, let's face it. I mean, we're trying to keep our seafarers alive while things are falling out of the sky intended to kill them by murderers. We're trying to do that in addition to run our businesses right now. But if you're not enjoying solving challenges, you're in the wrong line of work. And I, for one, really enjoy it. I really enjoy working with people like we find at these events that are all pulling the same direction. Decarbonization is an existential challenge for the industry. If we don't solve this puzzle, we won't have businesses to operate, so we must solve it. And it's such an interesting field that overlaps with different sectors that I can hardly think of something more challenging, but in the end, something that couldn't possibly be more rewarding than solving this problem, including both from the policy framework side to make sure we have the options available that we need, and then also from the actual delivery side to make sure we've got the fuels and the ships that are up to the challenge. I am optimistic, I am open-minded, and I absolutely believe working together we can get there through all of these challenges, including decarbonization.
Thank you so much, Bud. I've appreciated this time.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you all.